It was the time when Israel sank into darkness. Once again, the people had broken their covenant with the Lord, and his judgment rose from the sea. God handed them over to the Philistines, warriors from the sea, notorious for their ferocity, who carried with them a terrible secret, mastery of iron. While Israel still fought with bronze weapons, the Philistines forged swords that were harder, sharper, and deadlier. The ruthless Philistines captured the children of Abraham, plundered the fields, and for 40 long years humiliated and enslaved the people of Israel. But God did not abandon his people. In a forgotten village of the tribe of Dan, in the barren womb of a woman, God was preparing an answer. From that fragility would be born a man destined to change history, Samson. This is the story of Israel's most feared judge, who tore a lion apart with his bare hands, killed 1,000 men, and brought down an entire temple with nothing but his strength. But it is also the story of his downfall. Samson was human, and he had a weakness: women. His greatest battle was not against the Philistines, but against himself, against the pride that cost him everything, until he discovered that his faith was his greatest strength. In a village lost in the hills of the tribe of Dan, there lived a man named Manoah and his wife. They were a simple couple, yet they carried a deep sorrow. They could not have children. In those days, this was seen as a disgrace, as if their lives were incomplete. The woman's pain pointed to something larger. Israel, God's people, was also without hope, a fruitless nation oppressed by its enemies. One day, while the woman was alone in the field, a brilliant light surrounded her. An angel appeared and told her something that would change her life. "You are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. Now be careful, I urge you. Drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy will be a Nazirite to God from birth, and he will begin to deliver Israel from the hands of the Philistines." The woman, still trembling with emotion, ran to tell her husband what had happened. Filled with wonder and fear, he asked God to send the angel back so they could fully understand everything they needed to do. And God heard him. God's angel appeared again and repeated the message. They would have a son who must follow the Nazirite vow. Being a Nazirite was a very special promise to God. It meant that person would be completely dedicated to him. To fulfill this promise, the child would have to follow some very important rules. Never drink wine or any similar beverage. Never touch anything considered unclean, and above all, never cut his hair. Manoah, filled with respect and gratitude, prepared an offering for God, a sacrifice on a rock. And then something incredible happened. As the fire from the sacrifice rose toward heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended with the flame and vanished. Manoah, terrified, said to his wife, "We're going to die for sure because we've seen God." But his wife, full of faith, answered, "If God had wanted to kill us, he wouldn't have accepted our gift. He wouldn't have told us these wonderful things or made us this promise." And so, from barrenness came the promise. From that woman was born a child destined from the womb to deliver the chosen people. His name was no coincidence, but prophecy. Samson means little son, because in the midst of the darkness of Philistine oppression, he would be the ray of light announcing the dawn of liberation. From childhood, Samson was different. The Spirit of God began to move in him, giving him incredible strength that no one could explain. With each passing year, his muscles grew stronger, but a much greater battle raged within him. Part of him wanted to obey God and fulfill the purpose for which he was born, but another part wanted to be a normal young man and do whatever he pleased. This struggle between obeying God and following his own desires would accompany him throughout his life, and very soon would bring him many troubles. When Samson became a young man, everyone in Israel knew of his incredible strength, but also his impulsiveness. They knew he acted without thinking, letting himself be carried away by whatever he felt in the moment. One day, he went to a Philistine city called Timnah, and there he saw a beautiful Philistine woman. The Philistines were enemies of the people of Israel, those who had oppressed and colonized them, and they didn't follow God's laws. But Samson didn't care that she was a Philistine. He simply saw her, and in that instant, he decided she had to be his. When he returned home, he told his parents, "I've seen a woman in Timnah, one of the Philistine daughters. Get her for me as my wife." His parents were stunned and said to him with concern, "Isn't there a woman among your own people, among all our relatives, that you have to go take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" Samson's parents knew that marrying a Philistine was dangerous. It could lead him to break his covenant with God. But logic didn't work with Samson. His answer was blunt. "Get her for me. She's the one I want." To everyone watching, it looked like nothing more than a reckless young man's whim. But what no one knew was that this act was actually the first piece of God's plan for Samson's mission. Samson and his parents set out on the road to Timnah. At one point, Samson veered off the main path and ventured into a place dangerous for him, a vineyard. As a Nazirite, Samson had 3 main prohibitions. He couldn't drink wine, couldn't touch anything unclean, and couldn't cut his hair. Suddenly, the silence shattered. A deep, blood-curdling roar echoed through the vines. From the thick undergrowth, a young lion leaped out, strong, hungry, and heading straight for him. Samson stood alone without sword or shield, completely unarmed in the face of certain death. But in that exact moment, the Spirit of God came upon him, and supernatural strength flooded every fiber of his being. Fear vanished, replaced by overwhelming power. Samson grabbed the lion and with his bare hands tore it apart as easily as if it were a young goat. No one saw it happen, and Samson didn't tell anyone about what had occurred. But later, when he was returning to marry the woman, he went back to the place where he had killed the lion. He approached the dead animal's carcass and saw something incredible. Inside it was a swarm of bees that had built a honeycomb full of honey. Samson reached in, scooped out the honey and ate it as he walked along the road. He even gave some to his parents, but didn't tell them the honey came from the dead lion's body. But this seemingly insignificant act was actually very serious. As a Nazirite, Samson wasn't supposed to touch anything unclean, especially not an animal's corpse. Deep down, Samson was playing with the boundaries of his calling, disobeying and testing how far he could go without losing God's blessing. Samson's wedding day arrived, and as was the Philistine custom, the celebration would be a grand feast lasting 7 full days. There was abundant food and drink, music filled the air everywhere, and 30 young Philistine men were chosen to accompany Samson. But this grand feast was like a trap for Samson. We must remember something important. Samson had made a vow to live differently, avoiding excesses like drinking too much wine. Yet Samson was determined to impress everyone, and to show off his cleverness, he challenged them with a riddle. In a booming voice, he announced to the 30 Philistines, "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. If you can solve this during the 7 days of the feast, I'll give you 30 fine garments and 30 sets of clothes. But if you can't figure it out, you'll give them to me." Everyone was deeply intrigued, puzzling over the riddle. 3 whole days passed, but no one could find the answer. The men grew increasingly nervous and desperate. On the 4th day, they made a cruel decision. They went to threaten Samson's wife. They told her, "Get your husband to tell us the answer, or we'll burn you and your father's house. Did you invite us here just to rob us and make us poor?" The woman, terrified, went to confront her husband, and weeping against his chest, she said, "You hate me, you don't love me, you've given my people a riddle, and you haven't even explained it to me." Samson snapped back harshly, "I haven't even told my father or mother. Why would I tell you?" She wouldn't stop crying, and every single day left of the feast, she kept at him relentlessly. Samson held out as long as he could, but on the 7th day, worn down by the pressure, he revealed the secret. She immediately ran to tell her people, and before the sun went down, the Philistines gave Samson the answer. What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Samson felt utterly betrayed. Glaring at them with rage, he shot back, "If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you never would have solved my riddle." With these words, Samson was telling them they had used his wife to get the answer, like a farmer uses an animal to plow the field. The game had turned into humiliation, a terrible disgrace for him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him with incredible power, and filled with fury, he went down to Ashkelon, a Philistine city. There he killed 30 men, stripped them of their clothes, and gave them to those who had solved the riddle. Furious and deeply wounded by his wife's betrayal, he returned to his father's house. As the days passed, Samson's anger cooled, and he decided to try reconciling with his wife. He walked to her house carrying a young goat as a peace offering, but when he arrived, his father-in-law slammed the door in his face and said, "I truly thought you hated her. That's why I gave her to your companion. But look, her younger sister is more beautiful than she is. Take her instead." Samson's composure shattered. The woman he had chosen, the very reason he had ventured into enemy territory, had been handed over to another man like she was property. His humiliation transformed into an ice-cold fury, and through clenched teeth he declared, "This time I'll be blameless when I harm the Philistines." The offense wasn't just against him, it was against his honor and against his God. The Philistines would pay. But how could one man punish an entire nation? Then Samson devised a plan as strange as it was destructive. He went out to hunt foxes, or more precisely jackals, and captured 300 of them. He tied them together by their tails, 2 by 2, and fastened a burning torch between each pair, then released them into the Philistine fields. Within minutes, fire spread like a devouring roar. The result was apocalyptic. Flames raged through the crops, vineyards burned, wheat fields were consumed, even the olive groves were destroyed. The impact was devastating. An entire year's harvest, the land that sustained the Philistines, vanished in a single night of smoke and flames. When the Philistines saw the destruction, they demanded to know who had done such a thing, and the answer came quickly. It was Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because the man gave his wife to his companion. Filled with rage, the Philistines sought revenge. They went to the Timnite's house and set it ablaze, burning Samson's wife and her father alive. The news hit Samson like a crushing blow. The woman who had started it all, the love that had brought him to Timnah, had died because of him in the cruelest way imaginable. His grief transformed into a burning thirst for revenge, and he swore before heaven, "Since you have done this to me, I swear I will have my vengeance upon you, and only then will I be satisfied." And Samson kept his word. He fell upon them like a storm, unleashing his strength in a merciless slaughter, the air filled with screams and the ground with corpses. After the massacre, Samson withdrew, exhausted and with his heart still burning, and sought refuge in the cave at the rock of Etam. But the Philistines would not let such an offense go unpunished. They marched against Judah and made camp in the region of Lehi. The men of Judah, terrified, asked, "Why have you come up against us?" They answered plainly, "We have come to capture Samson and to do to him as he has done to us." The message struck the hearts of the Israelites like an iron blow. Samson had provoked a war they were not willing to fight. They weren't thinking about freedom from oppression, but about survival, so they decided to act. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cave at the rock of Etam, where Samson was hiding. 3,000 of his own brothers, sent not to support him, but to hand him over. When they found him, they looked at him with reproach and said, "Don't you know the Philistines rule over us? What have you done to us?" To them, Samson wasn't a liberator but a problem. His strength had ignited the Philistines' wrath, and his people, instead of rising up alongside him, chose to subdue him to save their own necks. Samson looked at them and answered coldly, "I only did to them what they did to me." But the men of Judah didn't stop there. "We've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." Samson could have defeated them right there, but understanding this was part of God's plan, and seeing his people's fear, he agreed to be bound. He asked only one thing, that they not kill him themselves. They swore to this, tied him with 2 new ropes, and led him from the rock to deliver him to his enemies. When they reached Lehi, the Philistines shouted in triumph. They believed they finally had in their hands the man who had devastated their fields and humiliated their armies. But in that instant, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson with power, Suddenly the ropes binding him became like burnt flax, and they fell from his arms as if they had never existed. Samson looked around for a weapon, and the only thing he found was a jawbone, the jaw of a donkey that had recently died. He gripped it tightly and began to fight. Dust rose up, screams filled the air, and the Philistines fell one after another. With a simple donkey's bone, Samson killed 1,000 men. The field was littered with corpses, and he, panting, raised his voice and declared, "With a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men." When the battle ended, Samson was exhausted, so tired and thirsty he was about to collapse, and he cried out desperately to God, "You have given me this great victory. Will I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of those who don't know you?" Suddenly, a crack opened in the ground, and water began to flow from it. Samson drank, regained his strength, and felt alive again. That's why the place was called En-Hakkore, which means the spring of the one who called out. After that great victory, Samson officially became a judge of Israel. For the next 20 years, Samson led his people. The Philistines feared him, and though they still ruled the land, they couldn't rest easy, knowing that at any moment, Samson might strike again. The more famous Samson became, the more the Philistines hated him. His exploits had made him public enemy number one, a ghost who appeared where they least expected and left destruction in his wake. But Samson still had the same fatal weakness: women. One night he went down to Gaza, one of the most important and fortified Philistine cities. There he sought out a prostitute and spent the night with her. It was a reckless act, walking into the heart of enemy territory, into a walled city crawling with soldiers, just to satisfy a fleeting desire. Word that Samson was in Gaza spread like wildfire. The Philistines locked the city gates and posted guards at the entrance, convinced they had him cornered. "Let's wait until dawn, then we'll kill him." They were certain that when daybreak came, Samson would fall into their trap. But Samson didn't wait for dawn. He rose at midnight and went straight to the gates that protected the city. They were massive wooden gates with giant posts and iron bars, so no one could break them down. But Samson ripped them out with his bare hands. The weight was staggering, probably over 800 pounds. But Samson hoisted the entire structure onto his shoulders and walked for miles until he reached Hebron, an Israelite city perched high in the mountains. There he planted the gates like a trophy, a silent and humiliating message. The Philistine walls couldn't stop him. Their security was an illusion, and not even the most heavily guarded city could hold back the man God had raised up. The news spread like wildfire. For the Israelites, it was a reminder that God was still with their judge. For the Philistines, it was the ultimate mockery. They had lost the gates that symbolized their strength and pride, and with them, they had lost their honor. But this spectacular and humiliating display of power would soon be overshadowed, because Samson didn't know that a far more dangerous trap was approaching that would seal his fate. In the valley of Sorek, Samson's destiny changed forever. There he met a woman named Delilah. She wasn't a warrior or a princess, but her cunning was a deadlier weapon. The man who could demolish armies with his bare hands found himself defenseless against her beauty. Samson, capable of killing 1,000 men, couldn't resist one woman. The Philistines saw the perfect opportunity and hatched a plan. The 5 Philistine lords approached Delilah with a proposal. They offered her 1,100 silver shekels, over 140 pounds of pure silver, an amount that could buy anyone's loyalty in those days. In exchange, all she had to do was discover the secret of his strength and how they could overpower him. And Delilah, driven by greed, accepted the deal. Soon after, with feigned sweetness, she asked Samson directly, "Please tell me what makes you so strong, and how you could be tied up and subdued." Samson, confident and toying with her, lied. "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that haven't dried yet, I'll become weak and be like any other man." That very night, while he slept, Delilah tied him with the 7 bowstrings. Philistine soldiers waited hidden in the room, ready to strike. Then she shouted the agreed signal, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you!" He woke up and snapped the bowstrings with astonishing ease, as if they were straw touched by flame. The secret remained safe. The first trap had failed. Delilah didn't give up. She approached him again, pretending to be hurt. "You've deceived me and told me lies. Now, tell me the truth." Giving in a little more to her insistence, he gave her another false answer. "If you tie me tightly with new ropes that have never been used, then I'll become weak." The plan repeated itself. She got new ropes, tied him while he slept, and once again shouted with all her might, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." Once more he rose up and snapped them from his arms as if they were mere threads. The second attempt was another failure. Delilah's frustration grew, but her determination to get that fortune was much stronger. And for the third time, she pressured him to reveal the secret of his power. Samson gave her yet another false answer. "If you weave the 7 braids of my hair into the loom and secure them, then I'll be as weak as anyone else." She waited for him to fall asleep and carefully wove his thick hair into the loom, securing it firmly. Then she shouted the usual alarm, "Samson, the Philistines are coming for you." He woke with a start and with extraordinary strength, not only broke free but ripped the entire loom from the wall and carried it off with him. 3 attempts, 3 failures. Delilah realized that games weren't working, so she changed her strategy. Now she would use her most powerful weapon, emotional manipulation. She began to cry and hurl accusations at him. "How can you say you love me when you won't trust me?" Her strategy was to break him down from the inside. Day after day, her words were constant torment. The pressure was so intense that, as scripture says, his soul was vexed unto death. Finally, Samson broke and told her the whole truth, the secret of his consecration to God. "I have been a Nazirite since my mother's womb," he confessed. He explained that a Nazirite was a person consecrated to God under a special vow. This vow included never cutting his hair. His long hair was the visible symbol of his covenant with God. If he broke that covenant, the consequences would be total. "If I am shaved, my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like any other man." Delilah knew he wasn't lying this time, and that this time he had given her his heart. Then she sent an urgent message to the Philistine rulers, "Come at once, for he has finally revealed his whole heart to me." Samson, exhausted and trusting, fell asleep on her lap. The Philistines arrived, this time with silver in their hands. It was a picture of perfect betrayal. While he slept, Delilah called for a man to shave off his 7 locks. The first lock fell, then the second, then the third. With each lock that hit the ground, a 20-year vow was broken, until the last lock, the 7th, fell, and the covenant was shattered forever. The Bible describes it with a simple, terrible phrase, "And his strength left him." Delilah cried out one last time, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke up calmly, confident he would escape as before. But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. He tried to break free, but couldn't. His strength was gone. Israel's hero was now just an ordinary man. The Philistines seized him instantly and, in an act of cruelty, gouged out his eyes, leaving him blind forever. Disoriented, they bound him with heavy bronze chains and dragged him to Gaza as a war trophy. There, the man who had delivered Israel was forced to grind grain in prison like a slave, doing the work of animals. Thus, the judge of Israel, the strongest man of his time, became a spectacle of humiliation. But what the Philistines didn't know was that there, in the darkness of the prison, Samson's true transformation was beginning. He had lost his sight, his strength, and his freedom. But in losing everything, he would learn what he had never understood, that true strength wasn't in his muscles or his hair, but in total dependence on God. As the days passed, Samson realized that God hadn't taken his strength because of his lost hair, but because his faith in God was broken. He realized he had played too many times with the boundaries of his vow, convinced that God would back him no matter what he did, but he was wrong. In the depths of his cell, Samson understood what he never grasped at the height of his power. He discovered that his greatest weakness was living apart from God. The man who had always trusted in his muscles, for the first time, began to surrender to the Lord's will. And then the miracle happened. His hair began to grow again. It was a symbol of hope, proof that the covenant could be restored, that a defeated man could rise once more. The story wasn't over, and despite everything, God still had a purpose for him. The Philistines, drunk with victory, decided to throw a festival in honor of their god Dagon, half fish and half man, considered the father of Baal and symbol of their prosperity. This wasn't a religious celebration. It was a political statement. They wanted to proclaim to the world that Dagon had defeated the God of Israel, that their idol had delivered into their hands the most feared judge. The temple was packed. 3,000 people crowded onto the roof and surrounding areas to witness the spectacle. All the Philistine princes and leaders were there, the military and political elite, celebrating what they believed was their ultimate victory over Israel. It was a national assembly to celebrate their enemy's humiliation. The man who had haunted their nightmares would now be their jester. They commanded that Samson be brought out and dragged him to the center. Samson appeared blind, his eye sockets empty, so weakened that a servant held him up and guided him like a fragile old man. The scene was humiliating. The hero, who once struck terror, now walked in chains, stumbling to the delight of the crowd. But then, as the crowd mocked him, Samson leaned discreetly toward the boy who was leading him and said, "Place me where I can feel the pillars that hold up the temple, so I can lean against them." The boy, unaware of what was about to happen, led him to the two massive pillars of wood and stone that supported the entire structure. This architecture, common in Philistine temples, placed the full weight of the roof on two central columns. As he touched both with his hands, Samson knew he held in his arms not only vengeance for his eyes, but the fate of all Philistia. It was then, amid the temple's clamor, that Samson lifted up his final prayer, a cry that pierced through the Philistines' mockery and reached heaven itself. "Lord God, remember me now and strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may at once take vengeance on the Philistines for my two eyes." With these words, he revealed everything he had learned through brokenness. He recognized that the strength was never his, but God's, and he wasn't asking for a long life, but for one moment of power in the name of the Lord. Then he placed his right hand on one pillar and his left on the other. The noise of the celebration drowned out the murmur of his voice. He breathed deeply, feeling the cold stone beneath his palms. And then, with a cry that thundered through the entire temple, he pushed, "Let me die with the Philistines." The two central pillars began to crack. The roof shuddered, and in an instant, laughter turned to screams of terror. The entire structure collapsed. Stone and wood fell like a river of destruction. Dust filled the air, bodies were buried, and the crash shook the entire city. The two central pillars began to crack. The structure groaned for a moment and suddenly gave way. The roof, with its 3,000 spectators, crashed down on the leaders celebrating below. The entire structure collapsed. The temple became a tomb of dust and laughter, turned into muffled cries of terror. In a single instant, the political, military, and religious elite of Philistia was annihilated. The Bible summarizes it with a stark phrase, "And those he killed at his death were more than those he had killed in his entire life." His final act had a devastating strategic impact, far greater than all his previous battles, but it came at a price. Samson died there, crushed beneath the rubble alongside his enemies, and through the sacrifice of his own life, he fulfilled the mission he was born for, to begin delivering Israel from Philistine oppression. His death wasn't a defeat, it was the fulfillment of his destiny. The judge who had led Israel for 20 years, with his final breath, placed his trust in God once more and accomplished the purpose for which he had been consecrated from his mother's womb. He will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. When the temple dust finally settled, his brothers and his father's entire household came down to Gaza to retrieve his body. They carried him home and buried him in his father's tomb in the land where he was born. There rested the man who had led Israel for 20 years, the man whose fall left a deeper mark than all his victories ever could. His story became etched in Israel's memory as a powerful warning. A man may possess the most extraordinary gifts, but without faithfulness to God, those very gifts become the seeds of his downfall. When Samson lost his eyes, he finally saw with spiritual clarity. He understood that without God, he was nothing, that true strength never lay in his hair, but in his faith. What Samson could never achieve in his strength, he accomplished in his weakness when he depended on the Lord. His final prayer stands as a testimony of faith, a cry that reminds us that trusting in the Lord in our darkest hour is the greatest form of victory. And his death, a sacrifice to save his people, became a distant echo of the redemption principle that centuries later would be perfectly fulfilled in Christ. From Samson, we learn that weakness surrendered to God can become the greatest of victories. His life is a mirror reminding us how fragile we are, and that redemption doesn't always come at the peak of success. Sometimes it arrives in our darkest hour. It's never too late to trust in the Lord. And this story now calls out to you. Perhaps you too are at that point where everything seems lost, where you feel you have no strength left, where your story seems to have reached its end. But if you trust in the Lord, He can transform your brokenness into purpose, your fall into a lesson, and your weakness into your greatest victory. It's crucial that if you know someone who needs to hear this message, you share this video with them. It could be exactly what they need to rise again. Support this powerful teaching with a like. And if you don't know the story of Israel's wisest judge, Solomon, or of Isaiah, one of the most important prophets to whom God revealed the end times, I'm leaving their incredible biblical stories on screen for you. Blessings to you and your family.